Now, it ripped across the UK, devastated our landscape, caused widespread flooding and even took lives. The Great Storm of 1987 was one of the worst in recent history and one for which we were famously unprepared.
So, 30 years on, how have our weather forecasts changed? Aisling Creevely has been to find out.
It was the most powerful storm to hit Britain in 300 years. Cross-channel ferries were beached, 15 million trees were uprooted and 18 people lost their lives. Well, I'm at the Met Office in Exeter asking the question, how did this happen 30 years ago and could it happen again? These are the stark images of the aftermath that many remember, but it's this TV moment from 24 hours earlier that became iconic.
Earlier on today, apparently, a woman rang the BBC and said she heard that there was a hurricane on the way. Well, if you're watching, don't worry, there isn't.
Although Michael had a point that it wasn't a hurricane like we find in the tropics, the winds did just as much damage. Back then, computer models or simulations of the atmosphere were not as advanced.
There are lots of reasons why the storm was missed 30 years ago. We used to have 2 model runs a day. And what used to happen is you would sit there, you'd look at it and you'd think, OK, that's what the weather's going to do. Nowadays, well, we're running models every hour now to see what the weather's going to be like for the UK.
In fact, what Michael Fish and his team were working off was coded information, which was then analysed by hand and meticulously pieced together.
These are actually very early images that you can see here. They do show you what would later become known as the sting jet, which brought the particularly strong winds, but at the time that wasn't particularly well known.
The detail is really difficult to pick things out. The clouds look really grainy, you haven't really got sharp images. And what we get nowadays, you can see how the weather is changing instantly in really crystal clear definition.
They may look ordinary, but there's only a handful of these original images left. Zoom forward 30 years, and it's smarter, louder and bigger than ever before. This is part of the Met Office supercomputer, one of the key elements in modern forecasting. It can perform 14,000 trillion calculations per second. That's about the same as storing 100 HD movies over 100 years. And it also weighs the same as about 9 double-decker buses. But of course, size is not everything. In fact, it creates a new problem.
You know, we have vast volumes of data, more than any human can consume in any one work shift. And so one of the most challenging parts is being able to be judicious about exactly, which parts of the data we look at, which models we look at.
It's amazing to think that 30 years on, we are still talking about the Great Storm of 1987. Not the easiest day for Michael Fish to have been on shift.
I just hope that when my day comes and I'm buried, that every single copy of that blooming VT gets buried with me.
Aisling Creevey, ITV News.
Oh, it must haunt him, mustn't it?
You've got to feel sorry for Michael Fish.
You do.
Oh, I don't know, he's infamous because of it though, isn't he?
Yeah.
And it wasn't his fault.
It wasn't his fault, and it wasn't technically a hurricane, as they said, because that comes from the tropics.
Very big storm.
These days, though, the bad weather is your fault.
It's all my fault, but we can predict things better because the computers are bigger, as you've just seen. And this is what we're predicting at the moment. There is a hurricane, but it's going to be an ex-hurricane by the time it reaches us. It's going to lose some of its intensity. So it's moving up towards the UK. Just a heads up for this, really. Late Monday into Tuesday, rolling its way. And we are expecting some very gusty winds, not quite as strong as in 1987, but still something to be aware of.